that his time is wrong, and that he and his whole society needs changing. To modern man's misconception of the nature of time.
Life is a dream. Reality is a dreaming. These kinds of statements imply that there is something ultimately fictitious about the way we tend to perceive reality. It's not often discussed, but no matter what time period we are born into, no matter where in the world, we will have some fundamental assumptions as to the nature of reality packed into our cultural upbringing. And it's tricky to discuss because if I say, what is the nature of reality? And I bring this question to you, you might not wish to make a stance on that subject. However, a stance will be made on your behalf by the culture. I hope that comes across. If you're hearing this, then you very likely have a greater or lesser influence coming from Western culture. And this would be to imply that the universe is a causal phenomena. Simply put, there was a big bang or some sort of creation, and time has been moving forward exclusively. And the world is predominantly a physical phenomena. Little else is relevant to the actual objective observation of life. And speaking of objective, that is the other assumption, latent in how we are brought up, is there is a objective phenomena outside of our personal illusions that can be sought or that is being hidden from us, so on. Usually when people bring up the life is but a dream or this is all an illusion, they're doing one of three things. They're going to use that argument to argue for simulation theory, or they're going to use it to argue for some sort of Gnostic cosmology, or it is a very mystic Eastern frame of thinking. Instead of approaching this material with a mind for agenda, what if we just simply explored where this other type of mentality has been throughout the history of our collective cultural ancestry? This life is but a dream mind. And if one gives oneself over to this level of investigation, they'll see that this has been hidden in plain sight all along. But if we're dealing with a fundamental question, a fundamental change of perspective, then we have to be prepared to deal with the depths and a degree of paradox and discursiveness that comes along with it. And coincidentally, the depths is where we begin. This is the oceanic feeling, as it's coined in the psychological tradition. The oceanic feeling traditionally was understood as a feeling of unity with the world around you. This is a meditative state, let's just say, where you dissolve as an idea, the ego dissolves as an idea, and you see the happening of the world all about you. And this is a perception of eternity. What all this is on about outside of our egoic frame of reference. The best way to reduce this state of being into a word is to say bliss. But as time has gone on, this oceanic feeling has had a colloquial definition as well. This is the existential feeling, the angst, the dread, the uncertainty as it swallows you. This is likened to building a sandcastle on the shore and thinking of this sandcastle as permanent, as an identity, as objective, factual, and unquestionable bedrock in this world. And surely this ocean will rise, the tide will come and wash it all away. This unknown, this uncertainty, this power outside of yourself that threatens to consume your cute little world, is also wrapped up in this oceanic feeling. In both cases, it implies a tremendous power outside of yourself. It's quite on the nose to call this oceanic or for it to be a nod to the waters, because if we look to mythology instead and we go all the way back to Sumeria and Mesopotamia, this is the very beginning of the universe. And early on in the study, you find it confusing because on one hand, the Abzu seems to be a character. But then, as you keep going, it starts to unravel and display that it's more of a state of being. The gods partake in the Abzu to ensure their own immortality, their own eternity. If this oceanic feeling is the sensation of everything outside of yourself going on, then it has a sense of eternity. This deep, perhaps even meditative, trance-like state that can come about us where we dissolve the idea of self, the ultimate seeking of most of Eastern philosophy. So, an early ceremony for the Mesopotamians was a water purification. This holy water to cleanse oneself of the burdens of day-to-day life and to re-embrace that type of mind, that Abzu. And notice here, absolutely encompassing state of mind, absolutely compromising everything else. So, to the ancients, the ultimate primordial state is this meditative state of being, of tremendous potentiation. Not to mention the fact that you are born, you as an extension of the world, you having your own world in your own head, was born via water, in the waters. This trope of the beginning being water is nigh universal. For the Egyptians, this was the waters of noon. And in the Bible, you see that God's face shone on the waters of the deep in Genesis. But in any case, there's always something else in these waters. There's always something that is perceived as very threatening in these waters. And this tends to be a great Leviathan, or for the Abzu, it was Tiamat, so forth. This is the chaos Kampf trope in comparative mythology. This great unknown, great uncertainty, chaotic nature that comes along with the waters. So on one hand, we had that state of bliss definition given, which is the Abzu mentioned. And then there is the other side of the oceanic definition, that threatening existential side of it. And this, to the Mesopotamians, was called Tiamat, or became called Tiamat. In the Bible, this is called Leviathan. For the Egyptians, this is Apophis. For the Canaanites, this is called Loton, so on. But we're going to come back to this later. For now, we're going to look more narrowly at specific traditions across the world. And we begin with the Aboriginals of Australia. And as should always be prefaced, the Aboriginals are many. Their creation stories are many. But there are some more approaching universal motifs that are pertinent to our investigation in this session. And that, of course, is Dreamtime. Now, this concept has had a lot of flack for being ill-suited. That the translations of this life philosophy, this approach, this way of thinking, are inadequate. And that has everything to do with the difference of ontology, philosophy, phenomenology, all these things between the animistic and native cultures of the world and the Western culture. This is especially apparent when you see the different translations for the term, not just dream time, but also the dreaming and the ancestral past and every when. In these many translations of the term, there is a considerable confusion in regards to an understanding of time. Most often, it's most convenient for the Westerner to consider this as more of a telling of the ancient past, how the dreaming ancestors created the world and brought about everything that we see today, such as seen in different geological features throughout Australia, how the dreaming ancestors made that so. However, instead of reducing it into a way that's more palpable, more interpretable to the West, one might consider instead the nature of time as being ever effective and ever present. That which did happen informs the future, and that which is happening encompasses both the past, present, and future. At the very least, as an experimentation of thought, instead of thinking of time as an arrow ceaselessly moving forward in time, think of it more as a web interconnecting with the past, the future, always, always, always simultaneous. What if the past isn't fully completed? What if our dreaming self is continuously completing the past of which ensures the present? This way of making it more amorphous is at the very least a good reductive introduction to this more ancestral way of thinking about what is going on here. What time is it? What time are we in? To speak more straightforward, these Dreamtime stories are said to be a place where every person lives forever. Perhaps this is a Akashic Records kind of analogy. These dreaming ancestors of the dream time brought the world to be from an amorphous landscape. All distinction and all the laws that govern this continuous distinction were dictated in that era. The dreaming ancestors are immortal and eternal because this continues and will continue in this way. Several of these mythic beings at that time have been turned into sacred places or sacred aspects. So, to speak very straightforward, their influence, their presence is not something relegated to the past. So we use the term dreaming, and that's because the term dreaming for us invites in a proper liminality. When we are dreaming, time doesn't obey as we believe time obeys. Dimensionality doesn't obey in the way that we think physical existence is objectively comprised. In this way, to say dreaming is the closest thing that we have to hinting at this other ontology, this other phenomenology that is interpreting the world hopefully in a different manner. In another sense, dreaming can be thought of as a term for consciousness or the collective experience of an individual, not just waking life, but also what we call the dreaming life. So with all of that together, not distinguishing existence as waking life is only real and dreaming life isn't real. All of it is real. And in that way too, other beings, the other animals that comprise our environment are also dreaming the world as we are dreaming the world. So this isn't just some nod to a whole different framework. It's also a nod to our individual psyches, our individual consciousness as we experience it in existence. So it's worthy to note that we are all, whether plant, whether animal, whether interpretably an inanimate object, this is all collectively and simultaneously dreaming. But how did we get this dream? How did we get this way of experiencing existence? Not just in our dreams, but also in our waking life, this experientializing of phenomena. And that is the dreaming era. the dreaming era informs our present dreaming. I hope I've done this subject a degree of justice. Of course, as an outsider to this culture, there's only so much I can do. This overall philosophy that's been attemptedly elucidated in this session so far is not wholesale unique to the Aboriginals. This is something that is uniform amongst animistic cultures. This way of thinking is oddly nodded to as well by Theosophy in its creation stories, let's just say. There is this idea of beingness or existence or density, physicality, slowly manifesting in the world. That there were other lesser density states of being that became of this world. So it started all very light, and then eventually physical bodies were manifested. Quite strange, but look into it if you're curious. But more pertinently speaking, amongst Native American cosmogonies, you'll notice a trope that animals and plant spirits, so forth, waited to come into being. They were not born and then they were. The world was waiting for it to become in a certain state so that these almost metaphysical attributes or innate beingnesses of the animals, of the plants, of humans could come to be, could be bountiful on the earth. And so in this way, there was almost a other state of being, a liminal state of being that awaited for the world to arise. Suffice it to say that the animals, or you, or the collective us, are eternal in design, or will come to be in one form or another. It's just a matter of the world aligning in such a way that allows this full manifestation to exercise itself. Like with the Aboriginals, the Native Americans believe that the ancestors were both comprised of animal and human. It gets hard to distinguish in these stories when animal and when human. And that is intentional. That is intentful. Here we get to point out another thing about the Western culture indoctrination. The distinctions between various forms of being. What do I mean? The Westerner is convinced of pure humanness. Historically, the belief that humans were superior to everything else, further up the evolutionary ladder than anything else, and thus entitled to much more than anything else, is obvious in why it holds that kind of loyalty. But instead, to perceive the world as a carousel of beingness, the animal as plant, or the plant as person, or the person as sun, or the person as lake, so on. The distinction between you and the other living things around you is not as sharply distinct as you might have been raised to believe. You can so easily project yourself into the being of other beings to, quote, imagine what it would be like to be the honey badger or to be the deer in the field, and to look back at yourself in those eyes. This moving of the dreaming into other dreamings. But let's focus a little bit more on the dreaming philosophy. Dreams are a means between the spiritual realm and the, quote, living realm. This is a means of communication. Often dreams were used to make decisions or to receive omens. This goes deep into our ancestral past and isn't distinct in animistic cultures. When the priest class began in Mesopotamia, this was one of the central means to discuss with the divine, to receive the words from the divine. If we even just look to the Bible, we could look to the visions of Ezekiel or the visions of Daniel. This is in the fabric of every single religious tradition. So your dreaming is very important and connects you to the spirits, or connects you to the influences that are otherwise viewed to be inaccessible or outside of you. This spirit world that is communicating with you in this frame of thinking is always in tandem and simultaneous with this world, is not up in the heavens, is not far away. It is ever present and always here, but this is the way it can talk. And also, it is believed in numerous animistic cultures that we used to be able to speak with the animals. This relationship was tarnished, and now the only way that we can speak with them is through the dreams. So in this way, dreams are viewed as the last vestige, or one of the last vestiges, for communication with reality or the greater world. So in these cultures that acknowledge the power of the dream, your dream could be your dream, your own personal omen. Or it could be a dream for the people, an omen for the people of which you are a conduit of it. And here's where the Jungians can come in and play. This is the personal dream and the collective dream, or what is called the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. If something is speaking to us and we are listening to that speaking, then it is informing us as to the future. It is informing us with knowledge from the past, knowledge from the present, and knowledge of the future, and is guiding our becoming, or guiding our continuous transition and development through the world and through the dream. If you want to Christianize this is the Logos. This is the Holy Ghost, the thing that speaks through time. This previously mentioned plurality or interconnectedness of time can be found nodded to by Spider Grandmother for the Hopi, or in the Lakota story of Iktomi being the spider, or taking the form of a spider and gifting humanity with the dream catcher. To paraphrase the wisdom given in this story of Iktomi gifting the dream catcher, there are a number of dreams received by mankind. There are many forces that are ever present. The good forces, or the forces that are of the Great Spirit, lead to harmony with nature, the wonderful teachings and the beauty that comes from harmony with nature. But the bad dreams or the evil dreams are also always present, and thus the center hole for the dreams to pass through. There are some different interpretations of this story, but nonetheless, importance is put on what dream is selected, or which ideas are best given growth, listened to, and that a number of them need to continuously be left astray, be given away, ignored, dismissed, understood as not something to roll with. And the allegory, or the symbolism of the web, is very poignant. A number of modern physicists hypothesize that consciousness is gained from quantum entanglement, not to mention quantum's own proclivity for spooky action at a distance, or for temporal anomalousness. But to get back onto the point a bit, the general native philosophy when it comes to the nature of dreaming is that it ought to be treated, at the very least, as important as the waking life. Its existence has as much fundamental credo as the waking life. The dreaming self is getting informed by its ancestors, by our ancestors. Wisdom comes through the dreaming experience. So often we can become lost in the confusion and the miasma of this mundane, profane existence. This is something that speaks to us from outside of that existence, that helps inform us as to where to go. This great spirit giving us ideas of where to lead this or how to continue on the way. This isn't distinct to the Native Americans. I think that's obvious already, since we've already mentioned the Aboriginal philosophy. But you can also see this with the Sami. There's a number of scholarly works that have coined various terms in order to try to understand the distinction between Western and Sami philosophy. And one of these is the pluriverse. So as opposed to a universe, again implying one verse, by the way, etymologically that just means the word given from God. It's a nod to Christianity, the one verse, universe. Instead, the pluriverse, in that it is many. There are many worlds continuously intersecting on one another. My world, your world, Badger's world, the tree's world, the sky's world. All of these worlds are continuously, simultaneously intersecting, as opposed to believing that it's all one objective reality, this fantastical thing that no one person seems to ever fully be able to distill. And the only time a, quote, objective world can be ascertained is when we put our worlds together, when we put our drives and our initiatives and listen to that same dream. Then something objective can come about, or then we can share in the mutuality of our own worlds. With this said, it seems very obvious that the world has ended many times over, and we are inclined to believe that the world means physical, manifestation, density, all of the material phenomena of the world. No, the world is our concept of it, is a consciousness of it, is a spirit of the times. That world ends, like our world ends in death. But that world is further becoming. So in one way, the world never ends, and in another, it is continuously ending. When you wake up from a dream, you wake up into a dream. It keeps going, it keeps continuing. The frame, the dimension, the perspective continuously shifts. Numerous, multitudinous other frames to go about this with. But let's go even further with this, because this dreaming philosophy hasn't been expelled from religious traditions since animism. It can be found intermixed throughout religious traditions across the world. And of course, as it always tends to be, Hinduism has a great bastion of this philosophy innate. To simply just point out that our senses are limited, our perspective is limited. We tend to only want to see what we want to see. And even with our senses being fully legitimized, the reach of those senses is so limited compared to the vastness of this world and the vastness of the greater cosmos. So yogis and Hindu bodhisattvas are quick to point out how, for instance, science would say that the chair isn't completely still. It's in fact higher density vibrating molecules that make it appear as though it's solid only relative to our own vibratory density. So in this way, we say the chair is still, yet in truth, by objective observation, objective in quotes, it is not still at all. Yet we would say very clearly it is. This displays the concept of Maya as it is in Hinduism. This is the illusion. The illusion is what we believe, what we think is real based on our senses of the world, is not in fact what is going on here. We're dreaming. This is illusion. The way that we perceive the world, the way that we talk about it, and all of the enterprise, as we are ever so close to discovering all the secret of secrets of the universe, is all silly stuff. Would we be so confident to say that the sky is objectively blue if, in fact, we could observe that it just appears so based off of our perception? Does it appear blue to all living things? This level of slipperiness, this level of uncertainty is the waters. The waters that we have always inhabited. Ideally, in Hinduism, Maya is not inherently evil. This illusion of the world is not inherently evil, but it has to be understood for what it is. An illusion, or a projection, or a very distinctive way of framing the world. But moksha, or reaching enlightenment, or seeking enlightenment, is seeking to divorce that dreaming of the world in seeking reality. Thus, the spiritual quest to release yourself from self. That this illusion comes from the ego, that it comes from the identifying with self. But if we dismiss that identity, we dismiss the Maya of the world, and instead we pay attention to the underlying patterns, fundamental laws of it all. If we look further east, we see this concept of the Taiji, or the ultimate, or the supreme ultimate, a kind of philosophical idea, a cosmological state that is inherent in the universe and in existence. This is the interaction between the opposing forces of yin and yang. It is in all directions, singular and simultaneous. Describing it leads to a number of paradoxes. It has no action, it has no form. It can't be apprehended, and it can't be seen. It was there before there was heaven and earth, and it has eternally existed. It is in the great above, yet it is not solely above, and it is in the great deep, yet it is not solely the deep. This is ether kind of stuff. The prima materia, the fabric of it all. It is older than the ancients, yet it is forever young. All manner of paradox latent in the description of this ultimate reality, this thing underneath the illusion of reality. A classic, more embodied example of this can be found in Taoism. The story goes that Zhuangzhou fell asleep, and it says, "Once upon a time, I, Zhuangzi, dreamt I was a butterfly, fluttering hither and thither, to all intents and purposes was a butterfly. I was conscious only of following my fancies as a butterfly, and suddenly I awakened, and there I was, myself again. And now I do not know whether I was a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or whether I am now a butterfly dreaming that I'm a man." This is perfectly illustrative of all that has been attemptedly expressed throughout this session. This plurality of dreaming or of consciousness. How easily we could project into each other. Why would one say that they are simply who they are right now? Is consciousness something that is locked away soulfully in one body? Is consciousness something that in fact moves across the world, across bodies, into many states of being? the key tenet, the key to understanding Taoism, just as an example, is the phenomena of change. Change is everything. Change is the only thing that doesn't change. The immortality of the consciousness is displayed by its ability to ever engage with this change. If you're this thing now, you can become another thing later. If you go to sleep tonight, who knows where you'll dream? The moving of the consciousness throughout various bodies is all that's been ever going on. This is the mentality. The immortality of the Abzu, of the waters, the belongingness amidst all of the phenomena of the world, this foreverness, is always available and perceivable to those that can enter that state, that are willing to enter that state. What this famous quote wants to solicit, what it wants you to ask is there a distinction between the butterfly and Zhuangzhou? Is there truly a distinction between the two of them? And if there isn't, this world is much more fluid than we might have otherwise conceived. This dreaming philosophy is not solely found in animistic traditions. As noted, we see how it's spoken to Hinduism. We've seen how it's spoken to Taoism. If you look to the ancient philosophers of Greeks, all the way back to the pre-Socratics, then Anaximander quotes the apeiron, that thing of which all things come from and that thing of which all things return to. That apeiron is beyond limit. You could also look to Ein Sof in the Kabbalistic tradition, that which was before the creation of the Sephirot, before the vessels of light had concretized, as just one way of putting it. What is that infinity prior to creation? What is this state of being underneath the appearance of the world? So with all of this said, it's not that there is the world, distinct, objective. It is that it is worlding, and we are little worldlings. It is perhaps not nearly as solid as we might will for it to be. The fear of embracing this more plural, this more multitudinous, amorphous way of conceiving the world is the fear of the unknown and the fear of uncertainty and the fear of retaining the self, retaining the ego, retaining the cute little sandcastle on the shores of the ocean. And so, in this life is but a dream idea, one might say, wake up. Well, what is that wake that you are waking up in or on the shores of? That's the waters. That's the wake. You came back from the waters. If you attend a funeral, there is a wake, meaning that that person has been allowed to move on, and now they wake up on the shores of the waters. Our culture informs our dreaming. Our culture informs our very framing of the infinity, of expansive potentiation that is existence. And on one hand, you can believe anything, as all peoples have across the world and across history. The imagination is endless, boundless, and liberated. Yet at the same time, there is this way, this collective unconscious, this will of the ancestors, or this other voice speaking through time that seems to be guiding people toward a sustainable or more true dream. That seems to be something corroborated throughout these various traditions. I haven't brought it up for a long time in the course, but when I asked the shaman, what's wrong with the world? What's wrong with this Western world? The quote is always the same. You've stopped listening to the spirit. And so this is a kind of call to receive that voice, to open oneself back up to that voice. We all come from the animistic traditions. We all have that in our ancestry. We have to redream the dream, dismiss the nightmare. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Spiritual Studies course is an initiative towards free public education on matters of spirituality, religion, and comparative mythology. If you enjoyed this session, then support for the course goes a long way. You can look to the Buy Me Coffee link in the description box below. If you want to give a one-time donation to help me buy a book, just to buy me a coffee, some solidarity, or to become a member and to get commentaries on each of these sessions, updates, and exclusive early access to each of the future sessions to come. If you enjoyed this session, then it's in thanks to those that have gone the extra mile to support this initiative. Those being Maggie, Slow Leak, John Crestwell, Deborah Cano, The Satyr Witch, Kristen, Nora, The Irrational Sage, Scorson, and Craig Mitchell. Of course, stay curious and keep wondering.